Okay. I think it's record. Yes, it's recording.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So, Mr. David Stone.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. I've known you for a few years, and we both lived in the same town.
Mm-hmm.
New agey kind of town of Totnes. You're now in another new agey kind of town. Beautiful Glastonbury. So I haven't seen you for a while, and I've just been enjoying some of your postings, because what I find when you post is you're quite real. So first of all, I guess, why don't you just share who you are, what you do, what you offer in the world? Yeah, let's start with that. Just introduce yourself.
Gosh, who am I? What do I offer and what do I do in the world? Well, I guess initially, like for the first 10 years of my career, I was a marketing consultant, marketing specialist. And I climbed the greasy pole and got promoted all the way up the ladder. And I got sick. And it was getting ill that defined me, I guess. I had a lump that big as a grapefruit up my bum. And it caused me, a lot of distress. I went to see a surgeon, and they wanted to cut it out. And I didn't really know much about healing and the new age. And I argued with all their ideas about rendering me incontinent, which you kind of would, wouldn't you, really? If you have anything about yourself, you don't want to accept what they tell you is the only options they've got on the table. And I was like, well, this doesn't sound right to me.
Was that the option, that you would be left incontinent? Wow.
I had a temporary fix or incontinence. Those were the two options. And I said, well, I'm not interested in either. I'll take the temporary fix. I don't want to be left incontinent. So she goes, well, there is an experimental technique coming over from America. I could try that on you. I'm like, oh, what's that about then? Oh, that's only come about because I've said no, to some barbaric sort of practice that would completely diminish my quality of life. And she goes, oh, well, we just do this, this and the other. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds really good. So I had the operation, and what it did was it left a stitch in my nether region. So the abscess that had created this huge lump could drain out because it was accessible to the open air through the kind of the stitch and that they put in. So I went to stay with a Native American Canadian in a sweat lodge, and that came about through a total, when you just get into a random sequence of events and life just picks you up because you surrender to the chaos, almost the benign chaos that sits behind the evolution of life. I surrendered to it because I kind of had no choice. Well, I had a choice to stay with what I knew and to stay with the disease and to stay with what the surgeons were saying, or I had an opportunity to kind of surrender, and that's what I did. And I came back and I made a full recovery, 100%. And it was such a big shift in my life and in my thinking. I went traveling, quit my job, went traveling, and on my travels, I discovered Gestalt psychotherapy in a bookshop whilst living with a cult, a meditation cult. It was a death cult, actually.
Really? Tell me about that. Oh, I need to know about a death cult.
Well, I won't mention them by name because that's not fair, but I lived in a compound with them, and they advertised like spiritual, personal growth courses, learning to meditate, empowerment, all these things that, draw in the new age seekers. And I was a bit sick. I was traveling. I wasn't well. I think I'd come over from Asia to Australia and my belly was off. And I just saw it and I thought, great, free accommodation, free course, give a donation, fantastic. So did the 5-day course. It was very emotional, very moving. And then they invited me to stay on afterwards and said, you're one of the golden ones. So of course my ego was like, ooh, I'm one of the golden ones,
That's classic cult behavior, isn't it?
I'm a special one because I'm very special. And I stayed, and got involved with the retreat centre and doing labour. I think we dug holes in concrete, which was really exciting for me at the time, and cooking and making the beds. And, you know, it was a proper 5-star retreat centre. It was really gorgeous, tennis courts, everything.
Where was this?
Well, I won't say exactly.
Oh, okay. Which country? Or can we not?
It was Australia. In Australia.
Oh, we were in Australia. Okay. Yeah.
And you weren't allowed to have sex. And that particularly, you had to have been chaste for 6 months before you could cook in the kitchen for the guests. And one day, they invited me to an event I shouldn't have really gone to unless I was a proper initiate of this religion. Because it was a religion. It was a registered religion. And there were older members of the community in the country of origin who would channel the founder. He would come into their bodies. Now, I have no problem with channeling beings or spirits. It's just what people do in the New Age. And some of it's really good. But this was this being coming into this lady's body and announcing that we were 800,000 souls and we needed 200,000 more, and then we could all meditate and create the end of the world and destroy the planet and create a cataclysm. And thereby we would come back first as the golden souls. And this was all going on behind this huge front.
So what were you thinking at this point?
This is just absolutely crazy. Cannot be part of this. You know, it's like, how can I give my energy and my potency as a soul to that outcome, to that reality? To unify with that. I was totally against it, and I went cold. It was like, and suddenly I just saw a different dimension behind the people there that I didn't find very alluring, to say the least. I called it the death of the inner child. There was something dead in the very eyes of the people, and the joylessness of the lack of playfulness behind the acting of it all. A kind of spiritual life. There was no joy. It was quite serious and heavy.
Yeah.
What we did on the courses was not how we lived.
Yeah.
So that influenced me to befriend this little old man who owned the little bookshop in the little town or village where this centre was. And as I got more and more alienated from them, and told the guy I lived with, who was a member of the cult, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, I don't follow any of their rules either, and they don't know anything that I get up to." So we were in hysterics, and I carried on living with him on the understanding I didn't need to be part of the cult. And I found Gestalt psychotherapy. So later that year, I left to come back to the UK and retrained, having been in business, marketing, manufacturing for the first 10 years and had a huge lump of money in the bank. Came back and retrained as a group Gestalt psychotherapist in London at the Gestalt Centre.
So tell me about Gestalt. What is that? Tell me more about that.
It's very Taoist, and it's very, very much based on the power of now. This moment contains the kind of entry point to healing, to all the potentials of how you can come back to completion, back to wholeness, back to health. So it believes in the fact that we're always attempting to return to homeostasis, to balance in any given moment, and we're trying to complete old unfinished business.
Yes.
So the human psyche is on the lookout to get its needs met, to complete unfinished things. And when one thing completes, it returns the energy that's tied up in that unfinished need or business.
Yeah.
And return back to the organism and make it feel more healthy and whole and complete. And that energy then completes and drops out of the psyche, so the body relaxes. And so then the psyche scans, and and then you reconstellate your realities based on your unfinished business to try and that's really part of the essence of Gestalt. We're trying to complete all the time, and interrupted and unfinished gestalts or traumas, they start to weigh the system down, because the available energy to focus on the next appearing phenomenon or gestalt and complete it is reduced, the more energy is tied up in unfinished business.
Yes. Yes, I recently had a series of EMDR sessions, and the release of energy is really interesting. How it's like your karma after it. You're more resourced. Just somehow there's not a background program running which is taking all your hard drive, all your,
Correct.
The energy. Yeah, really interesting. So, and do you think those come through genetically? So do you think we carry the gestalts, as you refer to them, from our forebears?
I'd say so. That there's a whole mixture. They're mixed in, and then we kind of unconsciously own them.
You personalize them, yes.
Personalize and create a narrative around what isn't actually yours to own in the first place. So it's like a legacy of ancestral trauma, ancestral habits, good and bad.
Yes.
That we identify as us, and then we create a weave and a story. And we're often trying to finish something that, particularly the deeper things, the yuckier things, when you've been around and around the personal growth scene for a few years, you notice you might look at your peers and think, God, they're acting out the same thing they were doing 10 years ago. I could see that in my own life. I was, quite accomplished in many ways, but I was still acting out some very core things that were just deeper than anything I could access consciously or even unconsciously, almost genetic in there. I'd say shame is on that level. Shame and our unique triggers around shame and rejection and abandonment, and then the addictive ways we try and avoid that, the personality adjustments. These are kind of gestalts we're trying to complete. And then we reenact difficult, unpleasant relationships to try and complete the origin of those unpleasant relationships which were never resolved.
Yes. So how would somebody get through that in a therapeutic context? Say somebody came to you and they've got a repeating pattern, let's say, I don't know, it could be abandonment. That's a classic one, isn't it? I think most of us have that anyway. Even if it's existential, and it's our sort of existential angst of being rejected from the womb or from oneness. But let's say we've got that running quite strongly in our story. How would you work through that with somebody?
I can give you an example, perhaps one that's really quite shocking, actually, that came through my training, which is why I think having a therapeutic training is quite handy to underpin some of the more woo-woo and maybe cosmic stuff that goes on. So you've got the science and the deeper origin as a kind of ethical underpinning. But there was this trainer, and he came to visit. So our kind of relationship, anything is like a relationship. It builds trust. It builds a strength to hold a ground for big stuff to emerge and come out. And as it comes out, and then a spaciousness and a ground for sort of homeostasis, equilibrium to come back in and integration. So that's the benefit of a relationship in a therapeutic approach and an ongoing practice. But this new facilitator came to the training. He was a little bit prickly and obviously unfamiliar, and wasn't interested in smoothing over any kind of sore edges and making us feel at ease. So one woman volunteered to do a one-to-one with him in the group, goldfish style, and he pulled his chair back from her to create more distance. So she pulled her chair back into him, and he pulled his chair back, and he goes, "Stop right there, this is close, you're close enough." It was quite a big distance, and she wanted to sit right on top of him, and he was like, no, you're quite close enough. And that was enough. That was an abandonment, came straight out for her. And as we sat there as a group, the women in particular were up in arms at this evil man who'd come in, and he'd upset this colleague. So there was collusion, there was triangulation, there was the Me Too thing going on. And I was just like, what the hell is going on here? There's like a massive trauma, there's a massive scandal. He wouldn't let his chair be close enough to her. Oh my God, what a bad man. It was like he was evil. And what actually came out was shocking. It was all to do with child abuse. It was all to do with her unfinished gestalt of wanting to be close to him, and that's how she got sexually abused. So when he set healthy boundaries of saying, no, you're close enough, rather than go reenact the cycle of abuse and unhealthy sexual proximity to person in authority, the healthy boundary brought up the abandonment.
Wow.
Which underpinned, and then this whole story came out. And and it was never reintegrated back into the process of the group process or her process. That was one of the failings of that. But you can see the power of just having clear boundaries, a defined sense of self, and how that acts as a kind of purification that draws up the distortion in another. So once you're clear of your own ancestral and personal distortions, you have perhaps a clinical underpinning to yourself, so you understand a few things, you've cleared your ancestral trauma, personal life stuff, you can act as a kind of clear screen that draws out other people's distortions and then hold that safely.
Yeah. So do you think we can ever, I mean, I suppose some more than others, but is there really a blank screen? Are most therapists got their own stuff still to deal with? I mean, obviously, that's a rhetorical question, really, but...
Well, it's a brilliant question, because that's why I left the Gestalt training, because it didn't address those past life, those shadowy, those deeper unconscious things. And you see a lot of psychotherapists acting out a lot of bullshit. You hear it constantly in their personal lives. They're quite tragic.
Wow. True.
Because I had that as well, but because I can hold a certain position, a power differential with a client, effectively I could still be a pretty much effective therapist to a point within that framework. And I wasn't satisfied. I'd be sat with clients and they think it was bloody brilliant, and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm feeling really resentful because I can't keep on giving this energy out, this attention on another when I need the attention.
Yes, you've got a program running.
Yeah, there was a little boy who was like, no one's listening to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is really worrying. And I spoke to my profession, my supervisor and my therapist. Oh yes, it's all part of the process. I was like, no, this isn't being addressed. I need something deeper than this. So in true, the style that I used to go about my life, I just jettisoned it at the point when I was just about to qualify. I thought, actually, I need something deeper so that if I do hold space with someone, I'm actually safe, I'm fully present. There's not a program running in me that I can't get to through my training.
Do they have a professional mentoring system where, I
have that, and it was actually compounding the shame.
Wow. That's quite easy.
Coming away from it, feeling
shame, isn't it?
feeling annihilated. I was coming away from the supervision, feeling unsupported and shamed and annihilated. And I didn't have a language. I just within my trigger go, oh, that's supervision, but feeling like shut down and patronized.
Let's talk about shame. Sorry. Let's go into shame, because I think that's something you talk a lot about. It strikes me when I hear the word shame, it's something that I know I carry a lot of, or I have carried a lot of. I'm working with it actively. Tell me about shame. What's your take?
Would you like to give your definition, because you've obviously you're working with it?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So really, probably quite simplistic, but guilt is when you feel guilty for having done something. I didn't pack the right packed lunch for my son. I'm feeling a bit guilty. He's at school. Oh, that's a silly thing, but I'm in the kitchen, so I can see the detritus of it still out. Shame is more about I am deeply wrong within. There's something deeply the matter with me. So there's no way I can rectify that. I have to keep it hidden and I think it's very closely linked to our limbic system, in that we don't want to fall out with our tribe because we're fucked if we do. So yeah, I suppose that's my definition. And I think I was talking to somebody and she was talking about a study in which people who hadn't watched TV, women who hadn't watched TV ever, so some tribe or something, and then something like 3 years after they'd begun to watch TV programs, mainstream television, that shame started coming into their, and physical shame, that they're not good enough, they're not beautiful enough, they're not. So that's a classic one for women, isn't it? Shame around not looking good enough. So yeah, I suppose that's my definition.
I think that's really
and I'm
good.
always wanting to air it. I'm always wanting to, I think it's such a healthy thing to bring oxygen and light to shame. So tell me about your...
I think you've hit on some of the main aspects of shame. There's a self-rejection, there's a self-loathing, there's it comes like a kind of mist through the collective. It comes like a download through the line, through the ancestral line. So it comes down line. It comes across through culture, and it's not something you often have a language for. We don't necessarily know what it is when it hits us.
Gosh, that's true. That's true.
Apart from our reaction and our pushing against it, so we have then a sub-personality that kicks in to push it away. And as we try and push it away, we might push the person away who triggers its presence for us. You know, I've done that a lot in relationships because I have a deep well of shame. And when someone triggers it, I'll push them away as if they are the cause of it. So there's a very significant victim essence of shame. So it's like, you are bad for making me feel bad. So shame gets pushed like past the parcel as the layers come off. And you see a lot in marriages and relationships, deep longer term relationships, where as that package gets unwrapped, it either becomes a bomb or it becomes a gift, as each side is willing to either take ownership of their behavior and their reactions to shame. And it's very relational. And I think if you think about what you said about women feel body shame because they've been rejected, they see that their bodies aren't good enough compared to the modeling industry, the makeup industry, the advertising industry.
Yeah.
If you imagine that perhaps shame is our erroneous belief that we are separate from our soul, and that we are not this majesty that is our soul's inheritance in our body. And it's the separation from that awareness that we are so much greater than our bodies. So it's that wound in the collective mind, in the ancestral mind, in the personal mind, that you are not this wondrous being. It's that cutoff that we are just mortal. We just leave a mortal physical one-off existence that has no connection to spirit, to God, source, and to a greater meaning and a greater sort of sequence of events and occurrences, a tapestry.
Yes. So
collective, point of view. Like on a macro level, it's the initial separation from our own inherent worthiness as being far greater than this physical specimen, in front of each other.
Yes, perhaps that sense of separation and disconnection from source is possibly the root driver of so many of our neuroses. I read in your one of your blogs, you talked about shame bombing. Can you tell me what shame bombing is?
Can you just remind me? I write quite a lot. Can you tell me what the context of that?
Oh, I didn't. Well, I was hoping you would tell me a bit more about it, because I've
just stalled you enough to remember, actually. So I hope I haven't shamed you.
Shame bombing.
Shame bomb is what? It was a narcissism article. It was an article on advanced levels of malignant narcissism. So they will observe where your weak points are, and they will know how to shut you down and make you feel that self-loathing for not being inherently good enough. So there'll be a pushing back. Like one of the classic ones in society is, you should be ashamed of yourself. How dare you?
Yeah.
And you're like, you know, it's like a shame bomb. It comes into you. It's a social snowball that's thrown at you to make you feel inherently bad for being.
So there are people that will manipulate that shame in this world.
But it's powerful. If you're not in charge of it, if you're not in charge of anything inside of you, there'll be something or someone that will have the abilities to use that quality in you against you.
Well, advertisers do it, don't they? I mean, advertisers do it. It's the base line of selling anything. There's something wrong. I'm going to fix it for you.
Yeah. It's a shame shower. Might not be a shame bomb. It's a shame mist. You know, it's like inherently, you don't look like this, therefore you're not good enough. Therefore, what it does is it pulls your essence out of you towards the desired outcome.
Yes.
And therefore, you lose your center. And when you lose your center, you no longer believe that you are this valuable being, inherently valuable. So you have to become something to some externalized ideal. And actually what you do is you move slightly out of time, out of space. You kind of slightly shift your level of reality. So if you're not fully here and present, you can't receive all the goodies that the universe is constantly co-creating with you. The abundance that is inherent in nature. If you look at nature, it's cyclical and inherently abundant. But it's very present. If you spend time in nature, you come back to presence. It's not saying go and be like the grapes over there or the apples over here. So my cat crying.
So a little fluff in the corner. Oh, look, the tail.
Your tail, yeah, there you go.
Oh.
So nature is inherently abundant. It is inherently anchored in time, and it's inherently in itself. Whereas what narcissism, love bombing does, and what shame does from this narcissistic industry, modeling, you know, dieting, whatever, advertising, which is inherently in love with the image, an externalized image, like Narcissus. It's falling in love with something that isn't of source, isn't of its natural self. It's the reflection of something, you know, commoditized, externalized.
Fascinating, fascinating, because narcissism is such a bandied term now, and rightly so. I think, you know, I don't think people are overusing it. I think we live in a highly narcissistic culture, and it's becoming more and more narcissistic. Really, it's digging its claws in. So narcissism, that's interesting. So there's an inherently manipulative quality about narcissism.
Yeah, and if you look at a 3-year-old, they're very manipulative. They have healthy levels of narcissism. And they need to learn boundaries in their narcissism, because they need to learn what's acceptable narcissism and what's unacceptable narcissism to get their needs met. The narcissistic drive, if you read any Freudian theory, develops when the child realizes it's not in union with its mother anymore. It's not the same organism, and the mother won't meet all its needs. And it wants to define itself. It wants to meet its own needs alongside that kind of union of mummy knowing everything that it needs, which is how it survives in the first.
So it realizes it needs to manipulate the world to navigate it. And so it's working
Exactly. Healthy manipulation. And Gestalt, they call that aggressing your environment. It's like chewing on a piece of bread. The bread won't just chew itself and digest itself and give you all its goodness. It's like a destructive, it's a conquering, you know, it's an aggressive pursuit to eat a piece of toast. You know, you're literally taking one substance and you're turning it into another.
I shall put that in the notes.
You're violating a piece of toast.
How eating a toast can be an inherently narcissistic, aggressive action.
So children have this inherent narcissism that if left unregulated, it's like Lord of the Flies.
Yes, a bit like the internet, a bit like Facebook.
And so there's a quality. Well, absolutely. I mean, the whole. We'll just come back to.
I'm serious with that, but go on.
We'll come back to that, but inherently, there's a starvation that most people go through because they're not given clear boundaries that are good for them. They're given wonky boundaries that encourage perhaps unhealthy aspects of narcissism, and are insufficient in healthy levels of merging. So people don't know when to merge with another, and they don't know when to separate themselves. So there's the whole attachment wounding. There's like the, so there's an attachment wounding around that early development, and there's a lack of presence in the caretaker. If the caretaker isn't able to lovingly and unconditionally observe their young one, because there's so much going on for them, there might be stress, there might be strife with the partner, there might be poverty, there might not be enough food to put on the table, they might have a war going on with their mother-in-law or whatever. They can't give that child their unconditional love. There's a lack of touch. There was that whole 70s and 80s parenting of leaving children at the end of the garden to cry themselves to sleep.
Yes.
Horrific damage to this sense of connection and healthy attachment. So you get all these factors that kind of diminish the healthy narcissistic supply, where we know our own inherent worth, because of the boundaries and the connection and the inherent reflections of you are loving, you are okay no matter what you're feeling, and it's okay that you did that, but here are the boundaries. You're not inherently wrong, but you need to know that that's not okay in this context. So with that loving parenting, you internalize a loving parent.
Yes. And I think what we find with a lot of new age parenting is it's gone the other way. So those of us who were wounded by absent or careless parenting or distracted parenting are now coddling and allowing the child to do exactly what it likes. And I've been not guilty of this, because I've got quite strong boundaries, but I've really noticed that. And then you've got really quite a lot of entitled children. They become very entitled. They become very, entitled's the word, I would say. Particularly around here, we have a lot of alternative schools. I'm really immersed in the whole alternative movement, and it's something I see a lot.
Well, there's a balance between being sovereign and being ferociously self-determined in your own will and your own sense of self, and being narcissistic.
Yes.
So that actually diminishes the quality of life for others without any consideration for how your own sort of entitlement then depletes the environment. Because narcissism in its negative sense is a breakdown in that collaboration, that cooperativeness of one person with another to create a collective good.
Yes.
It's like my good is more important than your good.
Yes.
In a way, that entitlement, and
yes,
we haven't learned collaboration, cooperation, haven't learned healthy limits.
That's really interesting.
Creates a healthy limits in the nervous system. So the nervous system knows when to stop and go. Go.
Yeah.
When you're very young, when parents set boundaries and rebuke you, what that actually does is it sets stop markers in the nervous system, in the dendrils.
Oh.
So it actually goes right into your very, into the very depths of your nervous system and your brain.
Interesting, because I think the parenting I experienced was incredibly hands-off. Seen and not heard, basically. Pop them in the garden, and then that translates to you just leave them. And it's quite interesting. As I observe myself now, I'm coming up to the age of 50, I see how I've got a very porous sense of self sometimes. So I'm always seeking for that, just to be located in space and time, as you said, but in relation to other people. And that's just been to my detriment, on the whole, to my detriment. And interestingly enough, there's a woman I'm connected with kind of professionally. And 3 times I've got quite close with her. She'll initiate always the conversations, the meetings, the subject matter, and I just go along. And each time she's then turned on me like an angry pit bull, you know, I've done something wrong. And it's always quite irrational. So it's been a real education for me because it's so irrational. Actually, this can't be me, because that's really a bit irrational. Like my rational mind can see, even with my porous nature. So today I encountered her again, and it was very interesting. I thought, okay, she suddenly engaged me again. So she's ghosted me 3 times. So she's flipped out at me. I've done something wrong. And then I never see her again. 3 times. And this 4th time she comes up to me today, and she was trying to engage me. And I was very pleasant and polite, but I could see myself getting drawn in, you know, really interesting. And I just went, the best way I could do it, I just went, got to go, and just like got the hell out of there, because I could just sense, like you say, my nervous system going, what the fuck?
Well, if you think about what I talked about, the element of you're here in time space, the very aspect of like the advertising industry pulling you out.
Yes.
So someone who wishes to kind of get a land grab of what's inside you,
yes,
will pull you out.
Yes.
And then they've got access to that placing you to anchor in by saying you're this and you're that. They can take the center point. So say you're doing yoga every day and you're building your kundalini and your energy, they've just hit the jackpot. You've vacated your place in time space. They've shamed you. They've pulled you into a place where you leave your center, and they pick up all the goodies of that state temporarily and access your core energy field, because you're not present to contain it.
And when we're working with these, they're kind of quite, well, they're not kind of, they strike me as being unconscious drives. So how would you, what are the signs that you're getting off center, you're coming out of your time and space? What are the clues? Well,
it's a really good question. It's a nice little thread, actually, because it probably brings us towards the close of our interview. That's a beautiful example. It's like you are always responsible for your own position in time-space reality. So you're responsible for how you respond to other people.
Yeah.
So you can see that the only way she can just bring it back to this person and then we'll come on to how you can hold your center. You're responsible for how you react or respond to this impetus.
Yes.
To disperse and to get engaged, so that then you can get pulled out, shamed, rebuked, and then ghosted. So as you saw a different way of doing it, you held your center more. You walked away.
Yes.
So that's one of the first things, free will. You chose differently.
Yes. Yes.
And when you choose differently, you build up a momentum.
Yes.
So life is all about momentums. You know that from yoga. The more momentum you have, the more power, the more strength. And then what starts to happen is the old patterns then drop away. And as you then get stronger here, building this new strength of staying here and moving away from that impetus, you change your reality, because then something different can come in its space and be attracted to you. So you change your polarity, your magnetism, to a different set of outcomes. And you can see, okay, I don't want to get engaged in that way. I don't want to be open in that way. So how do you do that? Well, I spend 3, sometimes 6 times a day meditating on my body, meditating on my skin, meditating on my bones, getting into a controlled breath, and aligning to the earth and my foundation, and connecting with pure source and my soul. So what that does is it entrains a sense of wholeness and a sense of solidity into my body. Yes. So that when I meet someone like that, I immediately even feel them coming into my aura, because I'm already meditating on my physical body and my aura and my position within the room. So I'm solid. Yeah. So then if I then choose to do something a bit more woo-woo and go journeying or whatever, I take my body with me. I don't surrender my body's consciousness and just go, woo, off I go into meditation, into happy land. I take my body with me wherever I go, my felt sense, in my spiritual work, in my client work. I don't leave this center of juiciness that I cultivate open to anyone to grab it.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I meet someone who has a tendency to want to push me off my center to access the goodies inside me because they're not connected to source and they're not sourcing that within themselves. Or ancestrally, there's something working through them, or entity-wise, there's some force working through them that hungers, using them as a kind of portal to access my inner juiciness. And that's probably for a different interview. And I'm here ready to protect myself. My presence is here and I'm holding my boundaries, and I can walk away or I can set a boundary or I can just contain it.
Yeah, interesting.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Coming back to your body, coming back to yourself, coming back to breath. It's really quite simple, and yet we're so not educated to do this, and it's something we learn probably through crisis or
well, it's so simple. It's so simple. It goes beyond even mindfulness. It's the frequencies of your true connection to source that you then entrain into your physicality. So therefore, you're not looking for anything from anybody else. You're not looking for completion. You're not looking for collaboration. You're not looking for love. You're not looking for intimacy, connection, because you already have that connection. So if they come and there's something sucky or drawing or distracting, you're like, hey, I'm not engaging with this energy.
Yeah, great. Wow. I feel like we could go on and on and on, but I'm aware that it might be, what time are we on?
I think we probably got about maybe 2 minutes left. I'm just looking when we started.
Okay. So, well, I'll tell you what, I think we should come back and do another interview because I find it very interesting, and I haven't even barely approached most of the things I wrote down to talk about. I knew this was going to be a great fireside chat, but just tell us if you've got anything going on that, or just, my
website's www.embodied soul awakening. That's embodiedsoulawakening.com, and there's loads more blogs there. I'm going to be creating some free courses on how to deal with narcissism, how to embody fully so that we can enact a healthy law of, what did you call it? Not the law of abundance, law of attraction, the law of so that really we just start to live life more wholesomely. I think really that's what I'm about, and how to then use that to clear diseases, to clear these patterns that we keep attracting, and that's what I help a lot of my clients with, very deep set patterns that they can't get past with traditional therapy, traditional psychotherapy. They just seem to be under the radar of, the therapy might make them feel good. So that's really what my work is about. If you check out my website, you see all the sorts of stuff that's there.
So it's Embodied Soul Awakening, all one word, .com.
Yes.
Dave Stone. And I reckon for our next interview, I'd like to talk to you about the law of attraction.
Oh.
Business being the operative word, but we'll save that one for the next time. So thank you, Dave. It's really good to see you again. And
really amazing. Really lovely to connect.
Really nice. Thank you. See you again.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.